And leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California. He is chairman of the House Intelligence Committee and a member of the January 6th Select Committee. Congressman Schiff, thank you very much for joining us on this important night. And I want to begin with what we just saw with Ari Melber's interview. In all of that information, you have now voted to refer to the Justice Department. The full House will vote on this. Presumably, it will pass. And all of that will be sent to the Justice Department. As a former prosecutor yourself, how long would it take someone in the Justice Department to figure out that Peter Navarro is guilty of criminal contempt of Congress? How many minutes after watching Ari Melber's interview could they conclude that?
Well, Lawrence, this doesn't take very long because Peter Navarro, as well as Dan Scavino, the other person that we held in contempt, made it simple for the Justice Department. They refused to show up. You can't just say, I'm not even going to bother to come. If you believe you have a claim of privilege, you come, you identify what question you're going to assert a privilege to. Now, they don't have any good privileges to assert, and that may be the reason they didn't show up. But it makes it very simple, or it should, for the Justice Department. So they're going to want to do their due diligence nonetheless, so I don't think they'll make a decision in a matter of minutes. But it should not be a difficult call for the Justice Department.
I mean, legally, the Navarro claim is exactly the same as him saying that the former federal employee named Trump, who's now retired from the federal government, gave him the authority to drive at any speed that he wanted to and drive through any stop sign he wanted to anywhere in America. It is such a legal science fiction claim that Peter Navarro is making. It seems like the Justice Department, every extra day it takes to think about this would just be embarrassing itself.
Well, you know, Navarro's out there pushing a book in which he talks about things which he says he can't talk to Congress about. Of course, that's enormously hypocritical, inconsistent. It just undermines any kind of a claim he might make. But again, it is vitally important that the Justice Department act on these criminal referrals. If they don't, if Congress can't enforce its subpoenas, it means we can't do our oversight. And if we can't do our oversight, we can't hold any president accountable, past, present, or future. It makes us into kind of a plaything for a despotic president. And so they need to enforce these congressional subpoenas. They need to hold these people in criminal contempt. And more than that, as Judge Carter wrote so eloquently in his opinion today, there is evidence that the president may have engaged in crime or fraud against the United States, and the Justice Department needs to do its part to hold him accountable.
There are reports indicating that Jared Kushner is cooperating with the committee and may be submitting to an interview this week. What can you tell us about that?
Well, sadly, Lawrence, there's not much I can tell you about that. We don't routinely talk about witnesses who may or may not be cooperating or may not be coming in for an interview or deposition. So at this point, I'm afraid I can't comment.
And what about the committee's consideration of Virginia Thomas as a possible witness, who, by the way, mentions someone she calls Jared in her texts to Mark Meadows?
Well, we are not making a comment on Ginny Thomas tonight. We may have more to say in the near future, but at this point, we don't have a comment. I can say more generally, with respect to either of these two witnesses, anyone who has relevant information the committee wants to hear from. And more than that, I think it's a patriotic duty for them to come in. In the case of the two people we held in criminal contempt, it was also a legal requirement. But people should not even require a subpoena to do their duty. We had a situation where efforts to overturn the election resulted in bloody violence in which people died. And it's an ethical obligation, a duty of citizenship, I think, to provide whatever information people possess.
The Supreme Court of the United States, the most powerful court, is the only court in America that has no ethics standards, no ethics rules of its own. It leaves the question of recusal to each individual justice to make for himself or herself. But there is one federal law that says it is against the law for even a Supreme Court justice to participate in a case that involves an interest of any kind of the Supreme Court justice's spouse. The spouse does not have to be a party to the case, a plaintiff or a defendant in the case. What we're seeing with Clarence Thomas's ruling about these communications that include communications by his wife is a very clear violation of that law. Could you imagine a clearer violation of that law?
Well, Lawrence, ironically, as a member of the Select Committee, I have less freedom to talk about this at the moment than non-members of the committee. But I will say this. I felt, I think, for many years now that there needs to be a code of ethics for the Supreme Court. And I think that it ought to hold justices to the highest standards. And I think that Congress needs to explore whether it can insist upon a code of ethics if the court doesn't adopt one on its own.
Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.